Welcome. So let me start with a question. When you look at your calendar, how much of it reflects what only you can do versus things that you're still holding on to or simply because you're not ready to hand them off? If you're nodding or maybe cringing a little, then you are not alone. Every leader that I work with has faced this tension. And it gets even more intense as you move up the ladder. And suddenly your scope has doubled, your team has grown, and yet you're still treating your time like you did in your old job. That is today's conversation, delegation, and how to set expectations about when you need to be involved and when you don't. This is what I see again and again. Delegation is misunderstood. And I also think that let's just delegate is probably an overused word. For me, it's not just about lightening the workload. It is about creating the right conditions for you and your team to operate without you having to be pulled into every detail. But many of the people that I work with hesitate. And hesitation comes from a few very familiar places, and I'm sure that this will resonate for you. One is that you don't fully trust the team yet. You haven't seen how they're going to handle a certain situation or a certain detail, so the trust isn't there. Secondly, you don't want to overwhelm them. You tell yourself they're already overloaded. Or deep down, you also think that being involved equals being in control. That is something that I hear all the time. And I get it. All three of those things sound reasonable. And they even feel responsible. But in practice, they are limiting you and your team. So I want to first break down the three most common patterns that I see in my coaching practice. The first one is the trust gap. When you don't know how someone will perform, the easiest option is to keep the work yourself. It feels safer. But it also keeps you from discovering what your team is actually capable of. Pattern number 2 is guilt and protection. And this is a big one. Almost everybody says to me, if I give this to the team, it's going to overwhelm them. They already have too much work. So you think that you're helping them by shielding them. I'll just handle it myself. But the first question I always ask my clients is, have you actually asked your team if they want to do this, or if they have time to do this, or if they have shifting priorities and they could do this? Because in reality, you are holding them back from growing if you're not giving them work that is going to stretch them and that is going to, where they can learn and just grow their capability. Pattern number 3 that I see is unspoken boundaries. And this is where many people stumble because you've never actually told your team when you expect to be looped in. So either they escalate everything to you, or you become the bottleneck because they escalate also nothing, and you only hear about issues once that they've blown up. And this gets really messy. It's either you know too much, you don't know enough, and it uses also a lot of brain space. So why does this matter? Why can't you just keep working how you always worked? First, because your calendar becomes really hijacked very quickly, because the work that you should have handed off or completed a couple weeks ago is still clogging your days. And that means less time for things that are important and not urgent. That high value work that you should be doing. Secondly, your team becomes hesitant. They start second guessing. Should I bring this to her? Should I wait? Should I decide myself? And that uncertainty shows everything down. And here I just want to pause and give you an example. So when I was a CEO, it was in my contract. For example, I'll just give you two concrete examples. I could hire certain people and sign off up to a certain salary level. And if not, it had to go to the group CEO. Same thing for investments. I could spend a certain amount of money on investments or R&D or whatever, but the same thing, it was capped. And that, having that framework and having those boundaries was actually very useful because I didn't have to say, okay, who do I have to consult? Do I have to consult this person? Who do I have to get buy-in? And no, I knew when I could make a decision and when I couldn't. And it was, looking back, so efficient and effective in helping us make decisions faster. So when you are also not delegating a lot, it's going to just simply limit your impact. You're going to fight fires. You're going to be double checking details. You're going to be chasing status updates. So those are the primary things I see. There are two others that I just want you to think about and be aware of. Your behavior could be signaling a lack of trust. So even if you don't mean it that way, the team ends up interpreting your behavior as she doesn't believe I can handle it, she doesn't trust me, and that really chips away at their confidence. So instead of stepping up, the team plays it safe and waits for you to step in. And finally, like I said earlier, there's just so many bottlenecks. Limbo, waiting for decisions, slowing execution. And that also doesn't send a very positive message because it's sending a message that you actually haven't built a team that can run without you, and that hurts your credibility. So delegation isn't just a nice to have. It is central to your effectiveness. And so I want to also just talk a little bit about a story also from one of my clients who had a team, but then they added in a second team, and then he was taking on a third team, but he hadn't delegated anything yet to his first team. So he was still, the ways of working with that he had implemented with the first team that he had were still in place, despite the fact that he had inherited two much bigger teams. And a lot of it really came from fear of change, fear of losing the comfort. And so we worked on, what can I delegate? How can we ease into this? What can they take over? How can you be informed, but not necessarily consulted? And so it is completely possible to start delegating. And I would encourage you to think about where you can do that. So the shift is moving from doing and deciding everything to being very clear about where you want to be involved or not. And so I have a very, two things. First of all, I want you to think about it as it's a mindset thing, first of all. You don't stay in control by hovering, because that can get into micromanaging. You stay in control by being very intentional about where you want to add value and where you can actually let others do their job. And so this is the framework that I would love to propose to you today. Think of it in three categories. I decide, we decide, you decide. And that is what you communicate to your team. I decide. This is where I am going to decide the final decision or the final choice in the matter. A lot of times it's if reputation is at risk, if there's high CEO visibility, company strategy, investment. I decide. And you know when you own that, you, the listener, and that is communicated to the team. We decide. That is what you communicate with your team are either it could be a cross-functional decision. It could be a shared risk decision. You shape them together, or they give you input on specific things. Marketing strategy. They have 80% of the say in it, but we decide together on, final copy of something. And the third point is you decide. So this is you telling your team when they can decide. This is when they operate in their lane. This is what they own. Maybe they check in with you. Maybe you don't. Ideally, they don't, because it's adding weight and takes up brain space. But the accountability is theirs. So to have the conversation with your team, this is a very practical exercise that you can do. In a conversation, you tell them, here is where I expect to be in the loop. Here is where I want us to decide together. And here is where I expect you to decide and make the call. So it sounds very simple, but most leaders never say it out loud. They assume the team knows. And please, listeners, never assume. Because honestly, a lot of this is about communication and just people. And when we work with human beings, it's like we always have our way of working, our way of doing things. And we think other people have a way of working and doing things, but they actually don't. And if we haven't communicated how we want to work, they can't guess. They don't know how you want to work. So it is your job, if you have a team, to clearly tell them. And when you do this, when you put these things on the table, 3 things happen. First one is your team moves faster. So there's the effectiveness and efficiency of working together. They gain confidence because they know where they have authority and where they can make decisions. And honestly, that you get your time back and you focus on what is important for you. That is how you scale leadership. So let me leave you with this. What is one decision that you can hand off this week with a specific agreement on when the team should involve you? Remember that delegation is not an abdication of your power. It is a multiplier of your impact. And you don't lose control by stepping back. You reinforce it by choosing where to step in. And when you do that, you're not just freeing up your calendar, you're building a team that leads with you, not for you. That is how you step into the arena.